This is the 415ers podcast brought to you by the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Mark, Randy, Evan Giddings, 3 times a week in the season, 2 times a week in the off season. We'll be coming to kind of like a staggered schedule a bit, Mark, but looking at some Mondays and Thursdays. That's what our next episode will come out this week, so keep an eye out for that wherever you get your podcasts. My response to that would be, and now that I'm thinking about it more, a little alluded to it, I guess, but I think if that's the scenario you're talking about, where Brock Purdy ideally is back at the beginning of training camp, well, right now, like I said, Brock Purdy is QB1R, so he is injured. Trey Lance then becomes QB1. He gets the reps, and unless he does something that would wow the training staff, the team, the coaching staff, the front office, the moment that Brock Purdy re-enters the fold, according to that timeline, the R, in my opinion, comes off his name, and he is QB1 again. Like that is to me the most likely outcome based on a hopeful return to play timeline for Brock Purdy. If he is back anytime during training camp, I think he immediately gets reslotted in as the one. Because again, it's not like after 6 months he's going to have to start throwing again. He will be unable to throw for 3 months, and then he will have a ramp up period for the final 3, taking him into training camp, assuming he's 100%. So in my opinion, he automatically becomes your QB1 because he was supposed to be your QB1 before he got hurt. That's unfortunate for Trey Lance, but I think that's the way that things will play out under this, assumption, just because that's the way of the world. Like, it's kind of unfair, but Trey Lance, unfortunately, hasn't gotten the chance to prove that he's the right quarterback for this team. And Brock Purdy has. And Brock Purdy took the baton and he didn't go 400 meters, Mark. He did the entire mile by himself. Like, so I look, I understand if you're a huge Trey Lance proponent, you're a Trey Lance fan, you want him to get a fair shake. And I do think he will at some point this season because, again, history has told us that Kyle Shanahan will need more than one quarterback over the course of a regular season. But I don't think it is going to be at the beginning of the year unless Brock Purdy needs something more beyond that repair or no surgery at all.
Yeah. I think you're right. If Purdy's surgery is successful and his recovery is generally straightforward and he's back, within a couple weeks of the start of training camp, and he at least has a couple of weeks, before the start of the season, before the start of the preseason, I think everything will be okay and there won't be, I don't know, drama attached to it, Evan. But let's say Brock Purdy waits another 2 weeks to get surgery for some reason. He's still seeking second opinion. That's probably too long. Let's say he
No, no,
waits
no,
another
no.
week.
Actually, I think that's a good scenario because the extension of this is, what if Brock Purdy returns
Yeah.
like immediately close to the season? Like that to me is more of a bigger decision for Shanahan.
Yeah. So what if he waits to have surgery 2 more weeks? He's seeking out more opinions. He's hoping he doesn't need surgery, but ultimately, after he and his team exhaust all of their resources, they say, you know what, Brock, unfortunately, we still need surgery. But now we're looking at him getting this around the 20th of February. And then he gets that surgery. He recovers relatively well, but he's not quite ready to go at exactly the 6 month marker. And he's back, week 2 of the preseason. Let's say it's something like that. And he has one preseason game and then the third preseason game, which generally a lot of starters don't play in. And then the season starts. What does Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers do then? Because they have a young quarterback, despite the fact that a quarterback that has proven that he's able to play well under tough circumstances, but he has a young quarterback who's never been through an offseason as the starter, never started week 1 before, and you're going to throw him in there week 1 without much of an offseason. Or you're going to give it to Trey Lance, who was, taking every single first team rep with your team all offseason long. That's where this could get a little bit dicey because, again, you have one player in Brock Purdy who is more proven, despite the fact that it is a relatively small sample size, and who the locker room absolutely fights for. You get the sense that if Kyle Shanahan creates a competition, a quarterback competition, the locker room might get a little upset because that's how much they support Brock Purdy. And whether or not that's fair to Trey Lance, I'm not here to debate that. I'm just here to tell you that's the way it feels from the outside. So I think that's where this gets tough for Kyle Shanahan and where he has to earn his paycheck, because that's a really tough decision. But there is a very real possibility, Evan, where Brock Purdy maybe delays his surgery a little bit more than the Niners are comfortable with, and they are familiar with this. It happened to Jimmy Garoppolo last offseason. And perhaps the recovery isn't, right at the 6-month mark. It goes a little bit longer. What do the 49ers do then? I'm not sure that's such a crazy what-if scenario. That is certainly possible. And it might throw a wrench into what the 49ers hope their offseason, what they hope their training camp, what they hope their preseason feels like.
Yeah, look, everything's on the table right now, and that is both good as well as bad for the 49ers because you have, like Kyle Shanahan mentioned, 2 starting quarterbacks. So at least you feel comfortable that one of them is going to be available for this season, if not both. And the sure one is Trey Lance. Of course, the flip side of that is, well, so far, Trey Lance has been shown to be closer to Jimmy G as far as injuries are concerned than your average quarterback that can stay healthy. And especially with the way that Kyle Shanahan has so far used Trey Lance, I cannot count on him being available for 17 games, say, if Brock Purdy has to get elbow reconstruction and is going to miss the whole year. Like, that's the worst case scenario, obviously. But if that's the case, I don't feel comfortable. Would you feel comfortable just penciling in Trey Lance for the entire season, Mark?
No, I wouldn't feel comfortable. And part of
But
that,
and it's not because of his play. Like, he's not going to get played off the field. I just haven't seen him be healthy.
yeah, if you were telling me Trey Lance is going to be the starter for every single game this year, unless injuries happen, like there's no competition, there's no other quarterback behind him, I would say no, because of the way that we've seen Kyle Shanahan run the offense with Trey Lance at the helm. It's relatively violent for quarterbacks. So I would not feel comfortable making that bet. The other thing, Evan, that's interesting is you referenced the end of season presser last week from Shanahan and Lynch a couple of times. Shanahan was straight up asked, is Brock Purdy going to be your week 1 starter? And he said, quote, those are things I haven't even thought about at all. So right now we're just working on coaches, and I think that stuff will play itself out by training camp. But
Do you
again,
believe that?
I think he is confident
That he hasn't thought about the quarterback position.
maybe he hasn't actually thought about it because it's already been a foregone conclusion for a while, but he's not telling the full truth. I think he's fully confident that, assuming health, Brock Purdy is the team's week 1 starter. That's the writing on the wall for me. But then the question with that quote becomes, Evan, okay, what if you haven't seen both quarterbacks by training camp? Then what happens? So I don't know.
I also think that if a head coach has not thought about his quarterback position, yeah, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. And maybe it's because of what you just said, which is he's confident Brock's going to be back. He knows something that we don't, and he's just going to pencil him in and go from there. But at face value, if your head coach says they have not thought about the quarterback position, I hear that as borderline negligent. Like, what do you mean you haven't thought about the quarterback position at all? I know it's only been a couple of days, but I can't think right now, Mark, outside of maybe Trent Williams, who is now returning. He's going to come back out of retirement or, pseudo retirement for this next season. Outside of that, is there any other priority that's larger on this team than the quarterback position? Because he clearly thought about Jimmy Garoppolo because he told them there's no chance that he's coming back.
I mean, no, there's no other quarterback or decision bigger for Kyle Shanahan than the quarterback position. So,
A minus.
he's not he doesn't care what he says to the media. It doesn't matter. I mean, excuse me. He's just giving you an answer. He doesn't want to say,
I
yeah, Brock's the
know.
starter. He doesn't want to say, yeah, Trey's the starter, because that's just going to cause unnecessary issues. So he's just going to sidestep it as best he can and say, oh, I'm not worried about that. And I mean, frankly, he needs to have, internal thoughts about it, but he doesn't need to have a decision now. I mean, there's still so much time and there's still so much to be seen by the injuries. I mean, again, before any Kyle Shanahan decision related to quarterbacks, the injuries have to play themselves out. He has to see Trey Lance in action after his multiple ankle procedures, and he has to see Brock Purdy in action again after he probably gets UCL repair surgery and comes back in about 6 months. So there's still a ton that has to play out before Kyle Shanahan ever makes a decision. But I guarantee you, he has thought about it. And maybe the only thought he's had about it is, well, if healthy, it's Brock. If not, I'll figure it out later. But he has had thoughts about it. He's just not telling us.
Yeah, I think you're right. I just want to know, Mark. I just want to know what Kyle Shanahan is thinking, because
Well,
it
good
seems
luck
like
ever figuring that out.
his thoughts tend to change on a day-to-day basis, publicly speaking, even though it does seem to me like he is one of the more process-based people that I have had a chance to observe in sports, for sure.